All right, welcome to this episode of Spotlight On, a series of interviews brought to you by Overdeck Family Foundation. Here, we sit down with nonprofit leaders shaping the future of education and talk to them about innovation, evidence, and growth. My name is Emma Banay, and I will be your host for today's Spotlight on Innovation. Joining me is Nick Monzi, co-founder and CEO of Learn Fresh, an international education nonprofit dedicated to enhancing students' STEM and social emotional achievement through sports and entertainment. Learn Fresh's flagship program, MBA Math Hoops, provides interactive STEM enrichment with a board game, accompanying curriculum, and mobile app designed to improve math proficiency in 4th through 8th grade students. Since founding Learn Fresh in 2013, Nick has worked with global corporations, leading school districts, and national and regional after-school providers to develop the Learn Fresh community program model. He's also presented at national conferences, including South by Southwest EDU, ISTE, Beyond School Bells, and the NSLA National Conference. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you, Emma. Excited to be here today and chat a little bit about our partnership and the work that we do.
Great. Okay, well, let's go back to the beginnings. What inspired the creation of NBA Math Hoops? And even earlier, what was your relationship to math as a student?
So there are really two parts to this story. The development of NBA Math Hoops as a game and curriculum started in a math educator's classroom in San Diego, California in 1997. And so one of the things that I love most about our work is at the heart of it is an experience that was built by a math teacher for his students and his community. I think that's something that sometimes can be really rare in the space of K-12 math curricula. That genesis really was the spark that led to the eventual development of our program model and the organization, and then the expansion into other content areas. Personally, before joining the founding team and really even throughout the last decade of my work at Learn Fresh, I've had another life as a music educator and an arts educator. And that space, music education in particular, was really the driving force behind my entry into education as a profession. And something that I love about arts education is that it's something that's so connected to students' passion, and it's intrinsically motivating when you participate in an arts class. You do it because you love it. Like, generally, music classes are not mandatory in most school systems, unfortunately. That we could have a whole other conversation on that.
Yeah.
But when I think back to my experience in high school and even beforehand, all of my peers and I, we loved to go to band or to our arts class or music class. But when you go to math class, it felt like something that we were told to do. And, I know of a couple students that were excited to go to math, but frankly, most of us weren't. And I always thought, particularly because I connected to math, like the part of math that I loved was the math that I saw on the back of my baseball cards, right? And so I always thought it could be really cool if math was intrinsically motivating as my music experience. When I joined the founding team, my motivation for participating in Learn Fresh as an organization and as a project and as a movement is really grounded in this idea that intrinsic motivation is something that should exist in this other space, in the STEM space, in math education. And I hope that we've made some progress against that over the last decade.
Absolutely. And I think that's what you're referring to as part of this big disconnect that we see in STEM education, which encompasses science, technology, engineering, and math. There's a recent study with GSG and Gates Foundation, which found that although parents and teachers thought that math was sort of the most important content for students to learn, it's perceived even by them to be sort of outdated and disconnected from the real world, beliefs in your anecdote that are shared by many students, unfortunately. And there's strong consensus that the key to solving this issue is to make math more real world, more relevant, more engaging. So can you talk a little bit about the role that you see Learn Fresh playing in inspiring that STEM interest, both in and out of the classroom, and capitalizing on some of that intrinsic motivation you described?
For sure. So tactically, Learn Fresh sits at the intersection point of STEM and social emotional learning and sports and entertainment. And so what we do as an organization is infuse themes, identities, and personas from the world of sports and increasingly entertainment into curriculum and game-based programs that live in K-12 classrooms, out of school time programs, etc. The second layer to that I think is really important and really central to our role in the field is framing math education in particular as a narrative, as a story. When you think about the long-term history of how humans have learned over time, storytelling has always been really central to the way that we connect with things, right? Like we pass down information from generation to generation within families, across friends, friend groups, through stories. And that those are the things that get us excited, that get us to connect to information. Math education, I think, historically has been devoid from this idea of narrative, of story arc. And so with our programs like NBA Math Hoops, our baseball programs, MLB Player STEM League, soccer, etc., the curriculum is almost built like a narrative where you start at the beginning of a season and you draft a team and you work through a series of games and you uncover different math concepts and you end with a championship tournament. And that comes around again year over year as a cycle that educators and students can participate in. That idea of creating that narrative arc to the learning experience in a math setting is something that's unique to what we do. There are others in the field that certainly do it well, and I think can be something that can help push forward this conversation around how to improve the math education experience for students.
Yeah. So you just referenced it a little bit, but for those who've never played or don't know the program, tell us a little bit how NBA Math Hoop works. How do kids get involved? What interests them? How does actual gameplay go?
Yeah, so the entry point is really with the educator for most parts of what we do. A well-equipped, well-prepared, and excited educator will ultimately lead to excited students. We believe that very much. And most of our work happens in classrooms and out of school time programs. Our mobile app goes a little bit directly to families. It's an area where we've dabbled over the years and continually put a little bit more emphasis. But most of our work is teacher-facing and then student-facing. All of our programs, NBA Math Hoops, MLB Player STEM League, MLS STEM Goals, have a game-based component to them. There's always a board game at the heart of all the programs because we want students to really sit down at a table, work face-to-face with one another, develop some of those social skills that you would normally develop in a performing arts group or on a basketball court, right? Things like teamwork and resilience and compromise, integrity, they're all baked into the curriculum and the kind of dynamics of the learning experience. And then in addition to the game-based component, there is this curriculum that serves as the narrative arc for the program. For the sports-based programs, it's a sports season starting with a contract signing and a draft and ending in a championship tournament. There's a second layer to the experience that is focused on community-based connections and education. And so for our NBA Math Hoops program, as an example, we partner with the league, NBA and WNBA teams across the country to create experiences where students and educators can leave the physical school building, go out into the community, engage with STEM professionals within the sports organizations, learn about STEM careers, learn about data analysis, celebrate their work through regional championship tournaments. And that part of the experience serves to build bonds across different parts of communities within one city or the whole country or the world. It also serves as a mechanism for creating a cycle for educators and students to keep participating year over year so that they feel like there's some sort of motivating factor behind why they participated.
That's such a perfect segue to sort of reflecting on an event you held just 2 weeks ago, the sort of national, global championships for NBA Math Hoops that was in New York City. Can you talk a little bit about that experience for kids and for educators and some of those sort of like real world community connections that you're naming that are part of the experience, sort of out of the classroom and off the board game and into real life?
The Global Championship is one of my favorite events because it brings students together and our partners together from all different communities across the US and increasingly internationally. And so the event that you described, the NBA Math Hoops Global Championship, is held during NBA Draft Week in New York. We had students from 20 different US cities, Australia and Puerto Rico, flying into New York City for a week-long experience with a family member, our staff, and some all-star educators, we call them, from across the country. And so students, through that experience, it's a one-off experience for a small group of students, but they get the opportunity to go to a STEM institution, in this case, Liberty Science Center. They get to interact with professional STEM professionals in the sports space. They got to go to the NBA offices. They got to go to the NBA draft and meet the draftees. And it's something that is life-changing for those students, but also we see as something that serves as a motivating factor for educators across the country to keep participating year over year. So that type of experience is what we replicate regionally. And so each team that we work with across the country will host, STEM workshops for their local students. We'll host a tournament at their arena. And we really try and create an opportunity where, most of the students that we're working with across the country, certainly greater than 50%, are able to access one of those local community-based experiences that help to extend the learning beyond the classroom.
So you talked a little bit about the really central role that these partnerships with the league and the teams play, both in terms of the development of the program overall, but also these sort of contextualized community-based experiences that young people have. And now you're sort of expanding your focus to include soccer and baseball programming, sort of expanding the leagues and teams that you partner with. How did you manage to establish these close partnerships with MLB, MLS, and NBA? This is, like, in my opinion, something so many organizations would dream of being able to leverage relationships with these really compelling, relevant partners. Like, how did you do it?
There are two parts to that process. One was a little bit of luck on the front end. So one of the members of our founding team, Bill Doherty, was a former NBA executive. Okay. And he had left the league, started and sold a tech company, retired, and met the inventor of the NBA Matthews board game while he was volunteering at a big picture learning school in Rhode Island. And Bill, through his connections to David Stern, who was the commissioner at the time, and Adam Silver, who was basically his coworker when he was the NBA in the 90s, he was able to engage the league in a way that got them excited about the program. They gifted us a license to be able to brand the product and gave us our first connection, which was an introduction to the Cleveland Cavaliers, who had a very experienced community relations team and a need for in-depth educational programming. Yeah. That was the first spark that allowed us to prove ourselves. And really, we spent the next 6 to 7 years, I would say, just doing the work in local communities across the country, showing the NBA that the trust that they put in us from the beginning was a worthwhile investment of their time and resources. Over time, we've been able to develop NBA Matthews into a truly national and international program that has come alongside NBA Cares as one of their signature initiatives. That progression has really allowed us to build relationships with the Major League Baseball Players Association, Major League Soccer. Really, the trust that we built through our work with the NBA program has led to those additional relationships.
And as you've expanded, it seems like there's real opportunity to sort of localize in those home markets where new teams and new leagues are present. So what does that look like as you get deeper into community with new teams as your program expands?
Yeah, there's so much opportunity in the U.S. and abroad just because professional sports are present all around the world. But, that specific question is interesting because it's really a balance, right? Like there's such diversity and such breadth of humanity present in leagues as a whole. Yeah. And so we like to really showcase like all the different players from a range of different countries in Major League Baseball through our baseball program, or all the different teams across the NBA and the WNBA through our basketball program. And so that's kind of core to how that we design the actual product that shows up for a teacher or student. We want to make sure that the full breadth of the sport is present. Locally, when we partner with a team, there's such an incredible opportunity to have conversations with their staff or like engage one athlete who's really passionate about math education or after school programs to build a little bit of a closer connection. And that's something that we've, I would say, become pretty expert at over time. And so now we're able to replicate that with new leagues and places.
Yeah. And this also, I feel like, connects to the research in the field about the really powerful role of role models and sort of when you can set up relationships between young people and people they look up to and admire who themselves like or endorse math. Like there's some powerful effects there. So the programs just are amazing for kids, and it's been incredible to watch program in person and see kids up out of their seats sort of cheering for math on a Saturday morning, especially for kids who sort of may not have historically seen themselves as a math kid or felt connected to math. And at the foundation, we're thinking a lot about the importance of programs that are really at this intersection of joy, giving kids authentic experiences that they love and connect to who they are and feel excited to show up for, and also rigor, where there's an opportunity to really learn something and something really central to their future, our country's future. So how do you ensure that Learn Fresh's programming stays educational while going big on it being engaging and fun for all kids?
For sure. So, I mean, to that specific point, I think feedback loops are really important, and not to be overly tactical, but we've always had really open relationships with our educators. When we were founding the organization, we actually did this summit where we would bring in teachers every year for a multi-day feedback session where they would sit down with us and give us in-depth insight into how the program model was showing up in their community. We've shifted the way that we execute that now just because over time, the amount of change needed decreases, but the open feedback loops with teachers have been at the heart of how we've been able to keep the content part of the programming relevant.
Yeah.
The other thing that I just want to point out here is I do think like our work is really rooted at the entry point to the math pipeline, right? Like we're working on foundational math skills, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. And maybe this is a point that I'm making more in advocacy for our work than anything, but a lot of people are like, well, basic operations are something that you can do with a calculator. Why do you need to spend so much time working with students on that? Or, this skill or that skill, students can use AI, in the future. Math is a language. And like, again, for me, for music is a language. When you're learning a language, you need to just develop comfort with the content, right? And you need to have exposure, in this case, to numbers and how they work and how they relate to one another and how they can be used in calculation. And so at the foundations of our work, developing that fluency with the language and getting students excited about the fact that, like, hey, I can speak math is the starting point. And that's something that, from a thematic standpoint, I think we can do at a really, really high level because we use these entry points that kids are already so excited about. And then from there, students can start to develop this fluency and then eventually move beyond us into higher level work. But I really think that idea is numbers as a language, and like what are the tools you can use to start building comfort with that is core to how we think about development.
That's perfect. Can you sort of like talk a little bit more about that sort of evidence of impact side? Like you're sort of talking to the theory of change there. What do you know, either success stories or data, about the impact you're having on student learning?
Yeah, there are layers to this as well. So, from day one, we've had a partnership with Kirk Walters, who used to be the American Institutes for Research, now at WestEd, and he really helped us build our kind of foundational pre-post models and, thinking around how we could do evaluation at the earliest days of the organization. Really, the launch of NBA Math Hoops within Learn Fresh was as a part of a national pilot study with a pre-post model. Like evaluation has always been connected to the way that we think about rolling out our work. Over time, that's evolved. Now we're working together with Kirk and WestEd on a randomized control trial study in Jackson, Mississippi with Jackson Public Schools, and excited to see, what comes of that. But that form of evaluation where we're looking, concretely at students' math achievement and students' social emotional development and students' enthusiasm for learning has been connected to our work for a long time. The other part of our learning has really been anecdotal, and I can't share a decade's worth of stories in 2 minutes, but
fair.
We've learned some really amazing things just talking to teachers, right? There's a school, IPS 39 in Indiana, Indianapolis to be specific, that started NBA Math Hoops last year. And by the end of the year, NBA Math Hoops, along with some other things that they were doing in the building, had allowed the school to surpass their math achievement goal like multiple years early. And so things like that, these stories around the way that the program has shaped community, has shaped school identity, or something that we're really proud of. One I want to share really quickly before we move on. Here in Philly, across the river, actually, in Camden, New Jersey, there's a school, Mastery Charter School, which won our NBA Math Hoops National Championship. And I was driving by the school one day, and this was back in 2019. I was driving by the school, and they had a banner on the fence outside the school that said 2019 NBA Math Hoops National Champions. It's like that resonated for me so much, because that's what we are really trying to do to shift school culture to. We want math to be an identity that feels like sport, that has the same cachet as sport in the community.
Totally. Can you talk, just to backtrack a little bit, can you tell us a little bit more about the RCT that you're doing with Wested? Overdeck Family Foundation is really excited to be investing in that study, sort of on top of the general operating support for your team, in part because we don't have a lot of evidence about what really moves the needle in terms of academic outcomes in the out-of-school time space. So can you tell us a little bit about what you're hoping to learn, sort of what made you go for this more rigorous level of evidence, and how you think that might feed into the work that you do and the case you're trying to make about Learn Fresh?
Yeah, we certainly hope that it shows some positive findings about Learn Fresh, but ultimately, we really want to learn through the study about what is actually happening when the program shows up in a really structured way in a community. And so the format of the RCT is built across multiple years. We launched it this summer with a cohort in Jackson Public Schools summer school. And educators use the entire program from top to bottom in the curriculum with the recommended number of games over the course of a month-long summer school session. And so that was kind of milestone number one, if you will, in the study. Change in math performance and student identity over the course of the next school year is now going to be measured to help understand where gains are being retained for the treatment versus control group. The study is exciting for us, one, just because we have talked about doing experimental evaluation of the program for a really long time. It's our first foray with this, but we launched the national pilot in 2012. And so we've been doing the work for a while. And as someone who's not particularly risk averse as a leader, I just want to do it. You know what I mean? I want to get the process going and start understanding more about our work at a higher level, so that we can continue to grow and evolve and make the changes that we need to make to provide the strongest program to our educators. But from a secondary standpoint, the other opportunity with the study is to build a close relationship with the school district around evaluation that can really serve as the model for how we do this in other communities across the country. I understand that for a lot of school systems, it's just really burdensome to do this type of evaluation work with external partners. Jackson's been fantastic so far. We're excited to build off of their enthusiasm to continue strengthening the work with them over the next year plus. But what we learn from this in terms of how we engage with the school system will pay incredible dividends for our ability to work with other schools in the future.
Yeah. Well, we'll be excited to follow along and sort of see the results of that over the next few years. I'm going to change tracks a little bit, because we've talked a lot about the student experience and what young people get out of participation. But to run effectively, NBA Math Hoops and the programs in the other leagues rely on many, many adults to make it happen. And in your programs, you work with two kinds of adults. You're working with sort of certified school day teachers who might be teaching in school or an after-school program. And then you work with out-of-school educators or clubs that are staffed by, program frontline staff that might work at a YMCA or a Boys and Girls Club. And we know that often adults of all kinds, maybe especially out-of-school time workers, can feel unsupported or not quite ready to support children's math learning, especially in topics that they themselves might not feel comfortable with or have had time to develop. So what's the secret sauce that you've uncovered for training and developing program staff? And what have you seen been successful in getting over some of that math anxiety that adults ourselves might sometimes hold?
There are a few really specific things that we've done, and so I'll try and quickly pinpoint a couple. One, the entry point to the curriculum, like the first lesson has no math in it. And so the actual first experience that educators are having with students is signing a sportsmanship contract and talking about the values of sportsmanship and how they show up in a competitive environment. And so that's something that I think, particularly in the out of school time space, where fun and competition and sport and activity is more central to that environment, it's something that allows the educator to have a familiar talking point, if you will, to start the program with students. So that's one. That was a shift that we made, maybe 6 years ago or so, that I think is really, really important, but small. Reshaped the initial iteration of the curriculum a while ago, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, not long after launch, to be, I wouldn't say super less rigorous, but a little bit less rigorous than you would want for maybe a fifth grade math class, because we want the curriculum to be conversational. And so a lot of what we prompt educators to do is, here's a talking point, say around like percentage decimal fraction conversion. The NBA represents all their percentages as decimals, even though they call them percentages, right? Let's talk about why that might be. Let's talk about like how you convert between the two forms of percentage and decimal. How does this show up when you look at a box score? How have you heard sportscasters talking about this on TV? Making the conversation in the class not just around the tactics of the mathematical sequencing and operation, but more around like, well, how does this information show up in the world? And so that shaping for the curriculum allows those who may have a little bit more math anxiety to still have something that they can talk about with the students because they have their own personal experience with it.
Yeah.
And then the third part is just being really intentional about the training process.
Yeah.
The training for our programs is short. Frankly, educators could onboard themselves, but we really like to have a personal touch point at the beginning of the experience. So there's some exchange of information and experience on our end from what we've seen other teachers do. But we try and include only the things that the teachers really need to know to do a good job and nothing more, because they don't have a lot of time. We're a supplemental program. We want to make sure that the experience can be as streamlined for them as possible.
Yeah, that's a through line that we've seen in many of the programs in the portfolio that are really focused on what educators need is, how does this really respond to their needs, which you've done such a thorough job with user testing and continuous improvement. How does this address the educator's own sort of need for information, their own sort of attitudes that they're bringing to the table around math and STEM? And then how do you make this like really fit into the context of out of school time, where time and resources and training are really at a premium? So it's helpful to know a little bit more about how you've made that work for your program.
Definitely. And I was just going to say too, I think hiring also can play a role here. All of our program staff, or the vast majority of our program staff at this point, have all had experience implementing a Learn Fresh program with students, either in school day or in out of school time. And so when they talk to an educator to provide support, it's out of personal connection to the program, not just, I believe in this.
Totally. And that customer service orientation, right? I, in a previous life before coming to the foundation, actually worked with Learn Fresh, and knowing that there's a team that's sort of there and ready to answer your question when you're not sure is a huge relief to frontline educator who might not know who to go with for that question. All right, so I'm going to close us out here, and I want to think about a question that we ask actually all of our guests in this series, thinking about the future. So looking ahead to the next decade in education, what's making you hopeful?
Well, one thing that definitely makes me feel hopeful is, and this is unique to our work, the shift in perspective that a lot of our partners have had on the corporate and particularly the professional sports side of our work. When we started doing programming in 2013, a typical community engagement by a team would be, showing up and doing a one-day event at a school and then leaving, or doing a backpack donation. I'm not saying those things aren't important, but the idea of implementing sustained, well-supported curricula and learning experiences in community through the vehicle of a professional sports team feels a lot more standard and a lot more prioritized in the current environment. And so for our work uniquely, that's a great shift that I hope continues. And then in terms of the field, the conversation around math education right now and this idea of real world relevance is something that we've been talking about since 2012. And frankly, inventors of the game were talking about it decades beforehand.
Yeah.
And so in some sense, we're like, hey, we've been doing this work for a really long time. But also, it's really refreshing to know that the field is having these conversations too.
Mm-hmm.
And so we, want to be a supportive, contributing partner to that.
Yeah. And sort of knitting those two ideas together, it feels like an incredible opportunity to have more consensus than ever around the opportunity to increase that relevance and engagement. And then the sort of like commitment and sustained partnership on the ground to make it happen. So I'm sharing in your hope that sort of bringing those two things together can really spell big changes for math education, both in and out of the classroom in really exciting ways. Well, thank you, Nick, so much for your time with us here today and for joining us for this episode of Spotlight On. It's been brought to you by the Overdeck Family Foundation, and we hope you've enjoyed the conversation. You can be the first to know about when our next episode hits by subscribing to our YouTube channel and our foundation's newsletter. Bye for now.